Okay, well, good morning. Good morning, June the 5th. A lot of things have happened since we last met a week ago. The pandemic is still raising its ugly head. Then, of course, we have some social challenges that we are trying to overcome as a country. This marks our 11th Reopen 757 webinar. And we're fortunate to have with us today our statewide lobbyist, Jody Roth, who represents the Retail Federation, who we are co-owners of that, as well as Jenny Crittenden, who is on our board, as well as she represents the Gloucester Main Street Preservation Trust. They'll be both talking about the latest updates, legislative updates, and of course the big news as it relates to moving into phase 2 that was declared by our governor this past week. We're also joined by Misty Lineberger, Pixel Financial Group. She will answer any questions you have related to finance or loans as it relates to the PPP or the EIDL loans. As always, please submit your questions in the chat box throughout the meeting. So let's go ahead and jump in. And Jody. Is Jody here?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone has had a somewhat of a decent week. I know it's been rough moving from COVID to the unsettled environment that we're in right now, and trying to reopen your businesses. So I hope it's not been too traumatic or much more of an upset than you guys have already dealt with. You all have received our phase 2 guidelines that we sent out last Tuesday evening, I believe. And in terms of any legislative update, we just are keeping our eyes open for when the special session is going to take place. We still believe it'll be sometime in August. And we have developed some policy positions on legislation that we might see coming forward. And we'll be implementing that into our legislative policy as it pertains to mandatory paid sick leave and liability for the business owners as it pertains to COVID-19. There hasn't been too much change on the legislative front as of yet. And I think this week, I think I just would like to open it up for questions that anyone might have for myself in terms of how things are going for you with taking it another step further with phase 2, or some folks just now being able to open. And if there are any stumbling blocks you've come across that you're looking for some guidance on.
No questions? I have one, Jody. When do you think that we could be looking at phase 3?
So that's a great question, and it was asked on our call with Secretary Ball earlier this week. And the answer we got, as we always do, as the governor says in all his press conferences, that this isn't date-driven, it is data-driven. So they don't have any exact date or time frame. They're going to see how phase 1 and 2 have done and go from there, particularly phase 2 as we open up more and more. And look at the metrics from the phase 2, and if there's any spikes and how businesses are doing and employees are doing before they determine when phase 3 will take place. If we stay on course as we did with phase 1 and 2, I would hope to think we would be into phase 3 by the end of June, but don't hold me to that. But that would be amazing if that could happen.
What would phase 3 look like?
So that was another question we asked. And we asked if we could possibly get them earlier than we have been getting with phase 1 and 2 in an effort to prepare our members. And we were told by Secretary Ball and his deputy secretaries that they aren't quite sure yet how it will look. I would imagine you're just a greater expansion of what you already have in phase 2, with restaurants, probably more pertaining to outdoor events. You might see a change there. Maybe a greater capacity percentage-wise for retail and restaurants to be open inside, and maybe for gyms as well. And a little bit more leniency with salons and barbershops. That would be what I would speculate.
Okay. Well, let's bring in Jenny Crittenden, who oversees Gloucester Main Street Preservation. She's also a board of director of Retail Alliance, as well as serving on the governor's task force overseeing the different phases of reopening. Jenny, do you have anything to add to the conversation?
Yeah, good morning. No, I mean, Jody definitely hit the nail on the head. I'm not quite sure what phase 3 looks like either. And I've had several questions from people asking how many phases will Virginia have? I don't know that either. I know initially when we first talked about it, it felt like there would be 3 phases, but I'm not so sure that's the case because some states have adopted more than that. So I guess we'll wait and see, and hopefully the data will take us as quickly as possible into subsequent phases so that business can get back to normal. If you'd like, Ray, I don't mind touching on some of the changes that are occurring in phase 2 for businesses.
Please do.
Okay, so overall, if you've printed out the guidelines, it's a lot of pages, but just in essence for the guidelines for all the business sectors, a lot of that has pretty much just stayed the same. Not a lot of it has really changed. It's more so thinking in terms of just continued physical distancing, the cleanliness requirements, mask wearing by your employees, et cetera. So you could certainly read through those, but I'd rather, if I could, just to dive into some of the changes that we're seeing in phase 2. So starting with restaurant and beverage, the biggest change we've gone to now is that you can actually dine inside of a restaurant at 50% of your lowest occupancy. So that's a real big deal for restaurants. I'm actually, what you see in the background here, I'm over on Cape Charles this weekend, and we still ate outside because it was so beautiful, but they did have some folks inside. So it was good to see, and certainly people were ready to get out and enjoy that. But you make sure that you're doing the 6-foot distancing between tables, and there does seem to be a little bit of confusion. It doesn't mean from one corner of a table to the other. It's actually the back of the seat. So think when the chair is being sat in, that the back of that chair to the next back of the next chair is supposed to be 6 feet. Some other things to be aware of under restaurant and beverage is, again, if you're going to have a larger party of people, that it has to be limited. Before it was 10 or less, now it's 50 patrons or less, whether they're seated together or across multiple tables. Bar seating, you cannot sit at a bar. So if you own a restaurant, you need to either mark that off or just make sure you've got some type of signage that says, please do not sit at the bar. We're still in the same phase with using single-use disposable menus. So if you've got those really lovely menus that are laminated, please don't use those. You need to use a single-use paper menu that is then thrown away in between each use. Something that I did notice different in here was prior to each shift, they want employers to ask employees to kind of self-measure temperature and assess symptoms. Just a recommendation from the liability standpoint, and Jody can certainly chime in. If you're doing this practice, which is what they're asking you to do, I would make sure I was keeping a record somewhere in a file with, written information that this was done and someone has signed off on that, just to protect yourself in the best way possible. We are
Yeah,
still in.
yeah,
Go
I would
ahead.
agree. From the
Yeah.
beginning, we have suggested that you do not take your employees' temperatures, but you could provide some sort of form to have them sign before each shift that they took their temperature and their temperature was normal, and just have them sign off on that so that you're covered, they're covered, and everyone's covered.
Yep. Yep. We're still in the no self-service of food and beverages, unless it was a dispenser where you don't have to really touch it. And then, of course, these thorough cleaning and disinfection practices every 60 minutes during your operation. Think in terms, too, if you've got touchpads or iPads that you're checking out people with, making sure you're cleaning those in between each use and minimizing that touch if possible. Table resets by employees who have washed their hands, patrons who are waiting for takeout, are seated in the lobby area waiting to dine, still have to maintain 6 foot of social distancing. So think in terms of how you can, lay out your waiting area as well. Let's see here. If you have tables that cannot be removed in your business, where you can put tables 6 feet apart, let's say you've got booths that are installed, they do ask that you mark those booths off so that people know that they cannot sit in them as well. So that's some of the changes we saw for the restaurant and beverage industry. I know that last time we covered a little bit on the farmer market side. So real quick, a lot of farmers markets had been doing, putting together packages and boxes and of produce and such, and people were coming by and picking them up, and they're still really encouraging that you do that. But certainly on-site shopping is allowed as well. But again, try to configure your operations to avoid congregating points, choke points, and continuing to implement physical distancing within the market. And then also, a lot of times at farmers market, you're handling cash. So making sure that in between each transaction, that employee is washing their hands after handling the cash. Under brick and mortar, basically a lot of that just stayed the same. Just continue what you're doing, make sure your signage is up. I know last time there was certainly the debate over the public having to wear a mask and should you enforce that, and we did clarify that from the Deputy Secretary of Commerce that they in no way wish to place a business owner in the role of enforcer or police and to put their safety at risk. Certainly signage, asking them to do that and encouraging them to do that, but you do not have to challenge them about that. Now, if you so choose to do that on your own, you certainly can, but you don't have to. They just would love the public to continue to wear masks, to continue to flatten the curve. One of the things in phase 2 also, you still cannot use dressing rooms if you have like a retail apparel boutique. And because of that, you probably will see some returns. So if you see apparel returns, you cannot return that clothing directly to the rack. You have to actually have a place. So think that you've quarantined ourselves at different points. Now you must quarantine your apparel that is returned for 3 days, basically to make sure that the virus is not in any way on the clothing, and give it a chance to die off before you return the merchandise to the floor. So that was something we did not cover the last time. Again, with your employees, distancing, demarcation on the floor for your customers, where they may be checking out, and just, allowing them to know that you're glad they're there, but let's go ahead and continue, some of these practices that we've already put in place. If a customer does have a reusable shopping bag, certainly they can bring their own, and you can put the products in that and they can leave with it. But I know a lot of places I've gone, they've said, well, do you want me to bag this? We're now just using like disposable bags at this point. Fitness and exercise, that's where a lot of people are happy that this has gone to phase 2, because in phase 1, if you were going to a fitness or an exercise facility, you could not do anything inside. Everything had to be outside. The difference here to pay attention to is that within a fitness and exercise facility, instead of being at 50% occupancy, they are reduced to 30% occupancy. And instead of 6-foot social distancing, the requirement is 10 feet of social distancing. So make sure you're paying attention to that. A lot of facilities, I know the one that I attend, they're still going to work first with some outdoor classes. We're getting into some of the heat now, so I'm not so sure how long that will last. But think in terms of if you're going into facilities, some of the things, even as a consumer, you would want to watch out for is if you work out with a trainer. um, Even that trainer is supposed to stay 10 feet from you, so they can't spot you. If you needed a spotter for weights, you would have to have it from someone in the same household. The equipment is supposed to be cleaned thoroughly in between each use. There's some equipment that's off the table that you can't use, as ropes and things like that, that cannot be sanitized. So this just gives you an idea of some of the things, if you do run a fitness center, that you do have to be careful of.
So Jenny, I just want to, I think there's some confusion swirling around gym operators right now. I was at my gym this morning, and I think the 30% pertains to classes, and that's what they believe. I took a class this morning and it was only 30% in there. However, the main part of the gym, the cardio equipment, they had every other machine marked off. And they are operating under the impression that it's 50% occupancy and 30% occupancy for classes.
That's not how it's stated, but
Yeah.
I will say that
I
certainly,
did bring that to their attention, but
yeah, I think with some of this, right, it's super difficult. I think people, business owners, and I fully understand it, where they're coming from. They take the guidelines and say, well, this is how I'm going to interpret it. And certainly they can do that. I'm not so sure. I think we would maybe want to take a bit of a nod from some of the larger fitness centers and gyms and see what they're doing. But it's not how I interpret it, but I'm not a lawyer. So take that for what it's worth. I certainly interpret it as the 30%, the lowest occupancy for the certificate of occupancy for the entire facility. Um, but believe me, I understand. I'm anxious to get back in with my trainer and in classes and doing what I love to do as well. So I don't know. Jody, do you think we should try to get some guidance on that to be more
well,
specific?
yeah, I'm already reached out and waiting to hear back on some clarification on that, just to make sure. I mean, this was the YMCA, so.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see. um, salons, barbershops, all the personal grooming, a lot of that basically stayed the same. Again, appointment only. You can't walk in. No more than 2 appointments per provider at a time, and occupancy at 50% or less. What's been interesting, if you guys have been going to a salon, and I went to mine this past week, is that they're actually held to a higher standard anyway within their industry related to their certifications. So they're basically going by those, which these guidelines are slightly less restrictive. So they're actually taking people's temperatures. I went into where I do acupuncture and massage yesterday, and they took my temperature on the outside of the building, but it was like 90 degrees outside. So that had an effect on the temperature on the thermometer. So, some of them are willing to take that on, and they're doing that. I don't encourage it, again, as we talked about from the liability standpoint, but some of the industry standards that are coming down from certain certifications related to what a business owner is certified to do, they're actually having to abide by that. So obviously there's other groups within this that I don't think really apply to our call today, but social gatherings is probably, to me, one of the more difficult ones to follow. So if you are planning a party or an event and you missed a graduation and now you want to have everybody over, read those carefully. There's some things in there that are a bit difficult to pull off, but that is, I think, it for me, Ray.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. We have a couple of questions.
Sure.
We have a owner who's asking about her business reopening today. You can purchase items to do your own home decor, but she also has classes. Is she allowed to reopen?
So is she?
I would say
retail?
she would have to probably operate under like the gym guidelines with classes of being 30%.
Okay.
Yeah.
What percentage of retail is that business?
Kimmy's on right now. She asked the same question a little bit lower, further down. So maybe she can go ahead and type in what percentage.
Sarah Pishko has asked a question. Can you have every other booth available for seating? There's a restaurant connected to her bookstore.
If the back of those booths are 6 feet apart,
Yeah.
Okay.
then yes. So I'm looking, and at 50% occupancy, let's not forget that. So I'm looking, and it says that Kimmy says I'm 100% retail now. In your, Kimmy, in your normal store model, would you be 100% retail? Like how much would be a classroom situation versus outright sales? So you would be 10%, is that 10% retail or 10% class?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realize I could unmute and speak.
That is so much easier.
Yeah, especially since I'm not the best typer. So normally in our business, I would say we're about 10% retail. I do have 2 business licenses for that reason. So I have a retail business license and a personal services license. So I've felt like this whole time that's kind of covered me because I can consider myself retail, and I've been doing a lot of takeouts, which has been working. But when I read the order, it specifically says arts and crafts facilities are closed. And it's definitely, like logically, my brain says, wait a minute, I can go into a class and sweat with somebody, but I can't wear a mask and craft. That doesn't make any sense. But it specifically calls us out. And we often have police riding through our shopping center. So I don't want to be in that position where they actually have read the order and they come in. But I do have competitors that are opening. And so it's definitely confusing to me.
Yeah.
Jenny, let's talk about, let's touch on that. I don't think law enforcement is the one who's enforcing this, correct?
No, it's through the Virginia Department of Health.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, I take that back. That's
The mask.
mask. Yeah.
I think law enforcement can. The question is, really, are they going to do that? So much of this is most likely complaint driven. I don't think, law enforcement is riding around looking to try to find a business to, catch, not abiding by the guidelines and look for a way to get them into trouble. I think that maybe, Jody, you're correct, like to err on the side of caution, to consider yourself like a fitness center and maybe start with 30% and see where that goes. We could certainly inquire specifically about that type of a model. That's the first one I've been asked about related to
That would be super helpful. Just because it's we spent a tremendous amount of effort in the past couple of months changing everything around to be what we are today. And we'd love to get back to it, but I just kind of feel like we're in this weird space of the effort it's going to take to undo everything we've done to get back to the other and then get caught where we can't use it. That's what's got me on the fence.
Yeah.
Kimmy, this is Jody. If you want to send me an email and just kind of lay out in detail what exactly you are looking to do and would like to do.
Okay.
And then I can pass that along to the secretary's office and try to get an answer for you.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, well, thank you both, Jenny and Jody. I really do appreciate that.
You're welcome, Ray. I'm going to wish you guys a fabulous weekend. And I'm going to actually sign off and head down to the beach.
Yeah, Jenny's taken a couple days off, so we've kind of included on her time off. She's where are you? Cape Charles?
I'm in Cape Charles right now, yes, for the weekend. And it's
Well,
beautiful
beautiful.
out.
Good.
Yes.
Enjoy it. Get
Thank
some sun
you.
rays.
I will. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
So now let's go ahead and welcome our next guest, which is Misty Lineberger. Misty is here once again to share any updates about the application process, dates for filings, and what else you might need to do concerning small business loans. So please post any questions you have in the chat box. And thank you, Misty. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Good morning, everybody. So, surprise, surprise, the PPP loans stuff is front and center of everything going on at the moment. I've got to tell you, the PPP loan has been one of those things that has made me the most nervous about everything because of all the rules and honestly kind of complicated to calculate the forgivability of it. So you all may have heard about the payroll protection flexibility bill that just passed the Senate finally yesterday. Trump still needs to sign it. So of course, I don't ever like to speak in absolutes until the president's signature is on the bill. But I do kind of want to go over the PPP forgivability of the PPP forgivability. I'm sorry, I'm looking at too many things at once. And just talk about where it was and then what the differences are so far. I am still learning since it was just passed. I want to see there were some small changes that were passed through the Senate that didn't pass through the House. So I just want to make sure I get a handle on all of those things. But for now, this is what I have. So as you all know, there are a lot of rules in terms of the forgivability of the PPP. And the first rule that was drilled into our heads initially was that at least 75% of this had to be used for payroll and 25%, no more than 25% could be used for non-payroll related expenses. Well, the bill that was just passed actually eases that up a bit and says 60% can be used for payroll, while 40% can be used for non-payroll related expenses. Although if you use it 100% for payroll, that's perfectly fine. However, 60% must be spent on payroll in order for it to be forgiven. If you don't use 60% of this, if you use 59% of this on payroll instead of 60, none of it will be forgiven. So they've gotten really strict about that portion of it. So make sure that you use 60% of this for payroll. The other rule was that the EIDL would reduce your forgivability of the PPP. That has not changed. So if you received EIDL grant money, just remember that how much you received of that grant actually reduces how forgivable the PPP is. So if you have a $10,000 PPP and you received a $5,000 EIDL, you're automatically looking at only $5,000 of your PPP to be forgiven because that it reduces the forgivability of it. So that is still in place. The other rule was this 8 weeks up to June 30th, that money needed to be spent for expenses through June 30th. That has changed through December 31st, and now we get 24 weeks to use it. However, you don't get to apply for the PPP any later than June 30th. So once June 30th hits, and after that fact, if you haven't applied for the PPP, you're going to lose your chance to do that. But this has helped so much for people who didn't receive the PPP. There are some people who are still receiving those funds for this month. And while those funds are retroactive back to February 15th. They can be applied to expenses back to February 15th. People were having a really hard time trying to figure out how they were going to spend this money by the June 30th deadline. So, or for expenses through June 30th. The other rules we have in terms of workforce restoration. Okay, so we have the FTEs and we have the salary levels, the salary and wage levels. Now, those haven't changed. They still want to make sure that you have the same levels you did pre-pandemic. However, they've added some exceptions. So one exception, which was in place to begin with, was the calculating the FTE if an employee refused to come back to work after a good faith offer was given for the same wages and same hours and, you know, basically the same situation prior to the pandemic. And you didn't have to include their time into the FTE calculations. So that's still in place. But an additional one is a lot of business have honestly had a couple of different problems. One, they're not able to find qualified employees in order to bring their FTEs or salary levels back up. Or they haven't been able to restore their business operations. So if you're a restaurant working at only 50% capacity, the likelihood that you need people or more people working for you is less. So, they are taking that into account, and we can make adjustments for both FTEs and salary and wage levels based on those two exceptions. Now, the other thing that has changed is, as you all remember, it was a 2-year loan at 1%. Well, now they've extended that to 5-year loan at 1%. Now, you also need to understand that the interest starts to accrue immediately. So payments are deferred, but the interest does start to accrue immediately. And I don't know this for a fact, and I haven't been able to find any actual guidance on it. I need to talk to a banker about it. But I suspect that even after the PPP is forgiven, we're still going to have to pay the accrued interest on it, because if we didn't, banks would never be able to cover their costs. But that's just something I'm going to confirm, but something to put into the back of your minds. Now, the one thing that this bill did not address is the tax deductibility of the expenses on which you spend this money on. Several weeks ago, 5 or 6 weeks ago, some of you may have seen me come on here completely incensed. I had received guidance from the IRS in my email that said we were not going to be able to deduct the expenses we spend the PPP money on for tax purposes, which really, in my opinion, undermines kind of the entire thing. A lot of people agree with me, but this does not address that. Now, a few weeks ago, at the beginning of May, a couple of senators did submit a bill to try and fix that problem. But as far as I can tell, it has received absolutely no traction whatsoever. And I don't know why, except that maybe that's just not the big fish to fry at this particular moment. Maybe it's something they're going to be addressing later. So again, it is still really important for you guys to be tracking what you spend that PPP money on, totally separate. So please be working with your accountants to make sure that your tax preparers are going to be able to determine what was the PPP expenses versus everything else, or tax season is going to become very, very difficult. Aside from that, those are the major changes. I'm going to be taking a class today where we're going to be dissecting this and trying to figure everything out. So hopefully by Monday, I'll be ready with a video that goes through everything step by step. Oh, there was one question somebody had sent me in terms of a couple of lenders have said that the SBA is covering PPP loans at 100%, while others have said they've covered at 75%. And then, of course, they would like to know how this would affect somebody who maybe doesn't survive, goes out of business. Now, I'm not quite sure what they mean by cover. I can tell you that, oh, here it is. From Amy. I'm not sure what you mean by covered, Amy. Can you clarify what you mean by covered really quick?
So the banks and credit unions are saying that the SBA has guaranteed the loans, the repayment of the loans by 100% if certain things are take place. Mm-hmm. But other lenders are saying that the SBA is only covering the loans up to 75% like a normal SBA loan.
Unfortunately, I do not know anything about that. I haven't heard that, and that's probably a better question for an actual lender. I'll have to look into that one because I wasn't sure what you meant by covered. What I know is that the PPP funds are 100% covered by federal funds. So in terms of how they're treating it, and I'm not sure if we mean that you're talking about paying the bank off 100% or 75%.
Is the bank so if a bank lends $10,000 to Retail Alliance and Retail Alliance goes out of business, does the bank lose $10,000 because Retail Alliance can't pay the loan back?
Yeah, and that's a great question.
SBA cover it.
Right, and in terms of the businesses going out of business after receiving the PPP loan, I did a bunch of research between yesterday and this morning trying to find an answer for you on that, and I don't have one right now. So I couldn't even find out whether that specific question had even been asked, because the bottom line is the PPP isn't going to save everyone, and we've already seen where people have received the PPP, maybe have even spent some of the funds, and we just don't know. I'm not sure how that is going to be looked at in terms of the individual or the business that received the PPP funds. So I think there are a lot of questions to be answered right there, and I just don't know anything about that. I'd have to talk to some of my banking colleagues to get a survey of what they're being told. So I'm going to continue to research that and see what I can find.
Okay, thank you.
So also Carlisle's asking about, he wants the new PPP. Should we apply now with the old application? Again, and any word on when the president may sign. I'm thinking he's going to be signing today. That's my understanding. I don't want to make any promises with that. One of the things that actually held, like, everybody's like, why did this take so long? Well, the reason it took so long is because, first of all, Senate's actually not in session. And when they do have to do something like this, when they're out of session, it has to be by unanimous vote. And believe it or not, there was one holdup vote on all of this in terms of how long we had to apply for the PPP loan. And once they got there, no later than June 30th, then it went through. But in terms of when he's going to sign, I would assume today, but I don't know for sure. And that's why I say we don't like to put everything in stone, because, you know, the House passed a bill, the Senate made changes, and I mean, just who knows what can happen between now and when that signature is put on a paper. So just be on the lookout for that. Hopefully, if he signs it today, I'll be ready with a video to go out on Monday about all of this. So in terms of the employer responsibility to notify the VEC and the PPP funds for those who accepted unemployment benefits. I would have to call the VEC on that one. So theoretically, yes, it's on the employer to report to the VEC when an employee has refused to come back to work because they no longer qualify for the unemployment benefits. I think a lot of us are going to start receiving, you know, those letters that we receive for unemployment claims, and that's certainly going to give us our opportunity to either accept or reject, you know, certain claims with reasonable cause. But I'm not quite sure how all of that is going to work yet. And just a lot of things. And honestly, to be perfectly honest, I haven't been focused as much on the unemployment as I have been through the small business relief programs. And although I do have a contact at the VEC, so I'll make sure to get in touch with them and have an answer for that on next Friday. All right, was there anything else?
Okay. Thank you, Misty.
Pleasure.
Great information, and hopefully, obviously, we're going to welcome you back next Friday, and maybe we can have some of those questions answered. Thank you so much for being a good partner for Retail Alliance and all of our members out there. So now I'm going to call on Kylie Seibert, our VP of Communication, and she's going to give us some updates. Kylie?
Yes, hi. All right, so once again, we have masks available, and these will be available until we run out. So we've still got quite a large quantity. So please have a look at the screen. You'll see on the south side, just continually at Retail Alliance headquarters. But on the peninsula, Beth Cook has arranged for Uncle B's Toys and Collectibles and Graphic Trends to both be pickup locations. So you can note the addresses for those. One's in Smithfield and one's in Yorktown. And it's they will be handing them out from those businesses at the times and days that are on the screen. We also have a loss prevention event coming up, which is going to be on our usual fourth Tuesday, June 23rd, this month, 9 to 10 a.m. though. So originally our loss preventions were a lunchtime meeting in face-to-face. So we have made this in the morning. So hopefully everyone can be available before they open their business. So that will be June 23rd from Matthew Natardis from Security 101 about using technology to assist against COVID-19. So a little bit about that. That's just presenting the various technologies that business and retail owners can use to protect themselves and their customers and staff from COVID-19. So it's like fever detection, mobile credentials, antimicrobial handles, and occupancy sensors and analytics, social distancing, and so on. So that will be a good one. So please join us for that. You can RSVP on our website, retailalliance.com. Just wanted to also mention that we have released the findings of our latest survey that we conducted last week. Thank you to everyone who had responded to our survey. I will put the link in the chat box to the findings of that. I've just posted that now. And it actually has quite a, it's interesting to see just how many people have applied for the different loans, who has received the funds already, how this has, really impacted their business. So please take a look at that, and thank you everyone once again. On the screen, you'll notice I've just left up here again, any of the resources. Please reach out to any one of us for any help that you may need, any questions you have, where all the staff is here to really try and help you. Ray, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Kylie. So our June 23rd at 9 a.m., we'll have our Strive Loss Prevention meeting, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We will have Matthew Natardis with Security 101 on how to share technology or how technology can help in the battle against COVID-19. He's going to be going over several different technologies that retailers and business owners can use to make staying within the guideline standards easier on themselves, the customers, and their staff. Again, that is June 23rd at 9 o'clock. So our next briefing is going to be June the 12th at 9:30. And if you have any needs, please feel free to reach out to your membership team, Tina Knight and Beth. So with that, unless we have anything else, Kylie, any other comments?
No, but I did want to point out in the chat that Lisa Renee had put the findings of her consumer lover survey that was interesting for businesses to look at. So just scroll back up in your chat box to see the poll results from that. Lisa Renee, did you want to mention anything regarding that?
No, just thought it was interesting, and since we're in a business format here, just wanted to let them know what consumers are feeling at this time, and just encourage them to post their safety procedures, because that makes consumers feel safe and want to go out and shop.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, then that concludes today's Reopen 757 briefing, and stay safe. We're getting back to reopening. That's good news, and we will be in touch. Please feel free to reach out to any member of the Retail Alliance staff, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.